Hello, and welcome to the February APQC Knowledge Management webinar. We're going to be focusing on 2024 priorities and predictions for KM today. So we're really excited to have you all here. My name is Lynda Braksiek, and I'm the Principal Research Lead here at APQC. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Cindy Hubert, our very own Knowledge Management Fellow. Now, due to the robust nature of most of our knowledge management conversations, we've actually scheduled this webinar for an hour and 15 minutes today. So we hope you're able to join us for the entire time and that we have a little bit of time at the end maybe to do a few more questions than we normally do. Also remember that at a minimum, we actually do always record and publish this webinar along with the presentation and a summary article, and coming soon, even some little highlights we're going to start adding to our resource library relative to the webinars. Now, we're going to do something a little different today when we get started, and we're going to start with a few announcements because we typically run these so close to the end of our webinars. We want to make sure you all know what other resources and events are happening at APQC. So we just want to share a couple of things that are going on right now. For instance, we have a live survey happening right now. If you haven't participated in that yet, please do. There's a link right here on this slide. And this is in relation to the role of technology in KM. So really looking at all of those emerging technologies for knowledge management. And it's open until the 28th of February still. We also have a couple of really great webinars coming up in the next 2 months. One focused on change management, and the other focused on content management, specifically in this new era of AI. And we're also going to do our first roundtable of 2024 for members on change management. And you'll understand why we're focusing so much on change management as we go through our priorities today. So stay tuned with that. We also have something new that we're trying with our webinar as well. If you see, there's a QR code on the screen right now. This is something that if you access this will take you directly to the research that we're referring to today in our resource library at apqc.org. So if you like to look up stuff while we're talking about it, get your phones out and try that QR code and let us know what you think about that. This is the first time we've ever done it in a webinar, so we're curious to hear how you feel about it. And then just one more reminder, we always have lots of roundtables and webinars happening in knowledge management and in some of our other research areas, so you can access that as well. But also we have an upcoming conference, which is one of our favorite times of the year, end of April in Houston, Texas. And Cindy, I didn't know if you wanted to maybe make a couple comments about the conference before we move on. You're on mute.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. I hope you all.
You're still muted, Cindy. Can you hit your button again?
How's that, Lynda?
That's perfect. We can hear you.
Perfect. I just hope you all will come and join us because I've been talking some of our keynotes. We're going to cover a broad range of topics, but we're going to go very deep, and the conversation's not as good if you're not there.
Exactly. It's always a lot of fun, and it's just a great time to collaborate with others. So now we're going to jump into what we're talking about today. And to jumpstart 2024, at the end of 2023, we sent out a survey to KM experts and practitioners. We want to really hear about what are the top objectives and upcoming priorities as it relates to KM. We had about 230 global participants this year, and this research is really looked at as a pulse check on KM's current state and also a look into what the future holds from a KM perspective as well. So our initial research is actually available in the resource library already, but coming very soon, we're going to have additional insight articles, videos, infographics, and other industry reports related to all of this research. So please keep an eye out for that. Today, we're going to focus on looking again at what does that current state of KM really look like from an investment, opportunities, and some of those broader forces maybe influencing KM. We're also going to look at the focus areas for 2024, specifically what KM teams are focused on relative to their business priorities, technology, user experience, and so on. Then we like to look at the future because we ask a few questions around what are those things you're looking for? What are those skill sets you need to develop? And we have some member insights to share as well. And then as always, we will close out with those key takeaways. And throughout this conversation, we really love having you ask the questions in real time while we're going through this information. So don't hold off until the end. Throw it in the Q&A, throw it in the chat, and we will monitor it and we'll make sure we try to answer it as it makes sense when we're going through this information. So a little easier to learn while you're doing it in the moment. We call that in the teachable moment, don't we, Cindy? So, so we're going to do that. And we'll also, because we have a little extra time, we'll try to allow a little bit more time at the end as well. So if we have some follow-on questions or some things we need to dig a little deeper into, we'll have some time for that. So we're going to get started. We're going to move on with the current state of KM. And we always like to start with that question where we ask people about what is your organization's current level of investment in knowledge management? And how might that look over the next 12 to 18 months? So really that near-term look. And this didn't really change that much from 2023. We're at about 68% of those people who are really looking to increase a little or a lot. And in 2023, it was 73%. The rest of the numbers are all very much in line. So it looks like we have a pretty steady state of investment for KM. Now, some of you might be thinking that's not how I feel in my company right now, because we know that it's different for everyone. So, but just something to keep in mind from an industry perspective, what we're seeing is a fairly steady state with KM. And I think you'll see the rest of our research kind of proves why that's staying in a very steady state. One thing to keep in mind too is, you know, we've had, as economic conditions change around the globe and over time, have we really had a recession lately, a bad recession or anything like that? So something to keep in mind is that if and when those things kind of do happen, it's really important for us as KM professionals to keep that value proposition top of mind as it relates to knowledge management so that you're ready for those disruptions. Just like with the COVID pandemic, KM was ready in a lot of cases to step up and help people with that virtual collaboration and bringing people together and making them feel comfortable in this new way of working. And now we have AI that hit us really hard. And it's like KM has a seat at the table as well for this. We're there to help people through these disruptive times. So just make sure you're keeping in mind what is that value proposition for knowledge management and how can you help your business through those times of disruption. So to get started, what are those top 5 opportunities for KM to capitalize on right now? Not surprisingly, 4 out of the 5 are the same as they were in 2023. Sometimes they shift in order a little bit, but a lot of these do stay fairly steady state. Employees are still very frustrated with chaotic and disorganized information, and we worry about retirements and churn as it relates to employee retention, critical knowledge walking out the door, and are we doing a good enough job of kind of eliciting that knowledge out of people's heads and getting it captured and transferred effectively? These things are really at the heart of what knowledge management does. So it's good to see it's still at the top of the list from an opportunity perspective. Number 3 coming in this year, new in the top 5, was the new technology like AI can help scale and deliver more value for KM. Again, not surprising. The last couple are really around leadership, making sure that they are actually recognizing and seeing the risk of knowledge gaps and silos. And so they're still wanting to stay engaged with KM. And also it's essential that we have KM, and as we look at continually upskilling our organization with so many disruptions and changes and new technologies coming into play, KM is essential in that as well. So I'll ask the question, anybody surprised by any of these or have anything different? Do we have anything going on in the chat yet?
Lynda, I wasn't surprised, but I'll tell you this, I was excited about number 2. So number 3 is all the buzz, right? And that's expected. And I think, honestly, there are implications that it's going to do a lot of things to help capitalize 1, 2, 4, and 5. But if you look at number 2, I was really excited about that, working with a lot of our members and clients and seeing what they're doing. Yes, there's still movement inside of our organizations more than ever. And people are so focused on that tacit knowledge. So yes, formal elicitations, captured, those are still going on. But I want to remind everybody there's a lot of ways and approaches you can use to really begin to get that tacit knowledge, that expertise out. If your communities of practice serve a great role with that, you just have to get them focused on it, and they love to do that because they're getting it out as you're going, and it's not a fire drill when somebody's leaving in 2 weeks and you're trying to get 40 years of knowledge out of their head. So that learning has really stepped up in development teams to really help bring that to bear, partnering with KM and using it in their mentoring programs. And then the third area is just some real strong documentation from technical teams that we're seeing. So those are all really good approaches. And I just wanted people to remind you, it gets to the heart of why we all love knowledge management so much. It's that deep experiential knowledge.
I love that. The great reminders of those evergreen capabilities that we can't lose sight of, even with the new exciting technologies that we have coming into play. Those core capabilities are incredible. So communities of practice have always been one of my favorites. I had a dialogue yesterday with a member about that, and we're going to be doing some more research on communities later this year. So I'm really curious to see where that takes us in this new era, right? With more technology focused communities and such. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, our audience loves COPs. I do too.
Absolutely. Well, that's where the people are, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so looking at threats, the top threats to KM over time traditionally stay pretty consistent. We're usually always looking at a lot of those same things, the way people feel, maybe overworked, they might not have time to do KM. KM can be hard to measure. That's something that we're always focused on. And Cindy, you're going to be doing some new research on measurement this year as well.
Yes, we are.
So that will be, I mean, it's always good to revisit those core areas that sometimes we can become a little complacent about because we've been doing it for a while, maybe. So I think it'll be good to really look at some new and traditional ways of measuring KM so we can continue that value proposition. So the interesting thing about the threats and the opportunities that always surprises me is that the leadership component is always in both. Leaders are seeing knowledge management and knowledge loss risk as something they need to pay attention to on the opportunity side. But on the threat side, it also says leaders are focused on what they perceive to be more urgent priorities, right? So there's always this fine balance of staying connected with our leaders, ensuring they understand the value proposition, but making sure that we are helping them to stay focused on what is most urgent for the organization as well. So it's always a fine line with leadership. But it's good to keep it front and center and to stay connected with those business areas so that your KM strategies are focused on the business strategies first and foremost. Number 4 this year is new on our list, though this is the one thing that did change, that moved up. I'm surprised it's the first year that it's really been in the top 5 in a while, to be honest, but that's people dealing with a lot of change. Now you're going to see a change. You're going to see an AI thread throughout our discussion today, and you're going to see a change thread throughout our discussion today. So lots going on in the field of change. And this is where it truly impacts the individual and their behaviors and the expectations of how they work every day and how that makes them feel, right? So we need to make sure that we're keeping in mind that there is a lot of change happening, and where does KM fall in that mix, right? Again, where are we showing the value from the knowledge management perspective? Number 5 on the list, it seems to always be on here as well. And that is about how do we incentivize knowledge sharing and reuse? And, every organization thinks about this differently. Some people just look at it more from an informal perspective, but those best practice organizations that really get this nailed down typically have the more incentives tied to real live measures, right? This is what I'm expected to do as part of my job. This is in my performance review. I'm rewarded as such for this kind of behavior. So just some of those things to keep in mind as we go forward with the threats. Anything else you want to add, Cindy, before we move on?
Lynda, I just added in the chat, just so, and I think we have to remember on number 5, in the early days of KM, we said right away that knowledge sharing had to have some intrinsic value. Mm-hmm. And I think we just have to remember that and figure out what that is for each of our organizations.
Yeah, I can see in some of the chat as well how it impacts people Number 4 and 5 strongly related to each other. Absolutely agree with that. Great comments from Chelsea, it looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good comments. Okay, moving on. This is something that APQC, we always like to look at that. It's one thing to look at what's happening in your organization. It's also another for us to make sure we understand what's happening outside your organization that might be impacting your day-to-day. These are some of the broader forces that we are thinking about right now that we believe you're probably thinking about as well. And I know there's probably more. But overall, these really don't stop us from doing knowledge management, but they do impact us, and they can be distractive. They can cause fatigue in our employees. And it really makes it hard sometimes to stay focused on what we need to when we have some of these outside factors impacting us. And I'm going to say professionally and personally at the same time. Sometimes it's hard to separate that from the workplace. The 3 that we have that we're talking about this year, Cindy and I have been kind of chatting about, is obviously the AI piece is big, and we had that last year as well. But this year we added the data privacy component to that, because not only is it about the new technology, but it's about what does that mean, right? And you know, so much of this AI technology is really valuable, but to keep it inside the organization is really critical so that our data and that IP is not released outside of our organization, right? So there's lots of legalities and new rules and regulations and government regulations and all of that going on around AI. So something that's really impacting us heavily, and knowing what these are before you head off down a path on something like AI is really, really important. Also, the organizational transformations. I mean, I feel like this is ongoing. I'd love to hear from others if this feels like your organization is constantly in a state of transformation, or if that word is even still used on a regular basis all the time in your company. It feels like it is. But this is where so many things happening outside are coming into the org, causing actual reorganizations. It's causing mergers and acquisitions. It's causing the elimination of departments and the addition of other departments, which changes our whole skill set mix, right, in the organization. It's just a lot of things happening at one time. And this can be extremely impactful for what KM is trying to do. The key thing is KM teams are there to help people through the transition of a transformation. So if we remember that at heart, right, we're there to help people get from that current state to the desired future state in the least painful and the least disruptive way possible.
Yeah.
And finally, the social and global issues. These feel really big, I think, the last couple of years, and likely since almost, you know, the COVID 4 years ago now. 4 years. Wow, crazy, 4 years ago. But lots of things happening, and people can get distracted by things that make them uneasy, like war or political impacts, or you're a parent raising kids, or this new remote hybrid work, and now some having to go back to work after they've been at home for a while, right? How people are investing is different based on a lot of this kind of stuff. Supply chain disruptions are still happening, right? It's just this pace of information is at a level that we simply can't manage very well. And we have all of these different sources of truth coming at us, right? And that's an external look as well, from a personal perspective, as well as it is from an internal perspective. So again, this is where knowledge management, let's help people stay connected. Let's help them stay focused on what their sense of purpose is, at the minimum within the organizations, which is where we can actually provide some of that control for them.
Lynda, we've got such interesting chats going on as you're talking, and I'm trying to keep up with you all, but I can't. So let me make just a couple of comments. I want to go back to what Lynda said. I think my observation is this. I think that number 4, people are feeling really uneasy. There's a lot of change going on in the organization. I think there's a very strong correlation to what's going on externally from our organizations too. And that's being validated by a lot of the comments in the chat. Just that you're just hit with it. And it's the pace of information. We haven't, for those of us who have been in the workplace for over 2 or 3 decades, we didn't always have that pace of information that's just constantly hitting us. And I get so many all across the spectrum of generations of people saying, I just got to tune out. And so I think it gets back to Gosh, Larry Prusak, the great Larry Prusak, God love him and rest his soul. He said to me one time that Cindy can take in a lot of knowledge. It's the information that they can't get to. Knowledge is so critical and important. And that always comes back to me because I think that's where we have a hard time really distilling what we need and what we may not need. And even inside the organization, Lynda, I think it's why we're seeing such a huge push with all of our members with content management right now, because they're just trying to get they're bringing the noise down a few decibels. You can't get rid of the noise, but you can bring it down a little bit for people. Right. And so I think that's a really important thing. And then there's another comment I want to build on. Devraj, thank you for making the whole notion of transition and transformation. I said that to Lynda. I said, God, I'm tired of transformations. And it seems like every time I get on a phone call, we're going through a transformation. I'm like, well, what kind? We're not finished. Did we finish the first one? And the answer to that question is interesting, guys. Ask yourself that. Did we finish the first one? What did finish look like? And so Devraj commented and said it's now transitions. And that's my thought too. I think what KM helps us do so much, Lynda, is transition through that transformation. But you got to nail these leaders down to say, what is it going to look like when we, quote, get there? And how do we help leaders have the patience? Because transformations can be exciting, right? You start out with passion. We're going to do this. We're going to change, but okay, let's get into it. And then people run out of stamina and patience and it all changes again. So we're in a cycle. We're in a spin. Cycle.
We are in a spin. We are in a spin. And I think that's why you're going to see this thread of change throughout all of this, because change is really there to help people through the transition from something old to something new, right? And that's why I think I really like that. Devraj, thank you for bringing that up too. We've been talking a lot more about transition instead of transformation. And somebody else put in their transformation is constant, whether we even recognize it or not, which is a great statement as well.
It is. And Lynda, let's remind our audience, because so many of them are in those programs that when COVID really forced us into that transformation, KM programs and leaders and communities helped us transition to get where we needed to be. So absolutely. Yep. You got to be able to show that.
So I'm gonna jump. The next thing we had a little dialogue here, but I did want to ask if we've missed anything. What other forces? We always like to ask this question, and I think last year we did it more in a poll and we gave them choices. This year I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna open it up. Is there something you're thinking about that there are other outside forces that might be influencing KM in your organization and changing how you have to work or just disrupting what you're trying to accomplish? We'd love to hear about it. Because I said, these are just resources.
Yes, it's always good to know that. And it makes me, Lynda, pause to one of the comments talking about getting executive leadership on board. So we always talk about value propositions and all of that. And I think that you've got to make sure you're talking in the language and what the leaders are talking about. You've got to put your knowledge management efforts and capabilities, and you can, into that thought. So people are talking about a main piece is buy-in, resources, absolutely.
Designing for hybrid work. And I'd be interested, I think, Victor, you put resources. Maybe say more in the chat what you mean by that. Do you not have enough? Do you not have the right resources? Is this just resources for your KM team? Just maybe expand on that a little bit in the chat, just so others can kind of see that. Yeah, the culture shift, returning to work, that is probably a big impact to some organizations who are now requiring people to come back. Yeah. That's actually good. Okay, love that. Keep them coming. This is great dialogue. We learn more from each other in this chat sometimes, I think, just on the side,
It's so good. I love who just put the self-service versus I want help. Yeah. Which camp do you fall in? I want help. Yeah. My grocery tally is different when I self-check than when the other things. It's hard to get all those things through that scanner. Yeah.
And somebody put in here, position AI prompts as knowledge. And that's an interesting statement. Let's keep that in mind. I'm gonna talk a little bit about prompt engineering later on as we talk a little bit more about AI. And so I think I know where you're going with that comment. Great stuff, guys. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on. We're going to talk about the focus areas specifically in 2024 for KM teams then. These are the top 8. And, every year the top number changes because, we give you an opportunity when you complete this survey to choose, I think it's up to 3 of what your top priorities are. And anything that really falls in that 20%-ish range is really what we put in the top. And so, there's quite a few in here this time. I think last year we had 6 or 7. This year we've got 8 that we decided to share because I just feel like they're so important. But if you look at it, identifying, mapping, and prioritizing critical knowledge is on top yet again. Transferring expert knowledge is number 3. Now, again, these are very core traditional KM priorities. And I'm happy to see that they're still there because that is at the heart of what we do from a knowledge management perspective. Now, we did add, there's a few places in our survey where we did feel the need to add a few new answer choices because of what's happening in the world right now. This is one of those questions where we dropped in incorporating AI or generative AI and smart technology as an actual priority. We didn't feel like it was being captured before. And it dropped in at number 2 the first time that we put it in here. So obviously it's top of mind, it's top priority. We couldn't not talk about it and we needed to narrow in on it. So important for us to see that. But I like that it's wrapped around, again, the traditional knowledge management components, because what the AI piece will do is help us do and manage those other priorities even more effectively if we can get a handle on what that technology can do for us from an automation, from a simplifying our work, removing repetitive tasks, things like that. The boosting KM participation actually dropped quite a bit this year. And I don't think it's because it's not important. Again, I think it's because priorities shift based on what's happening in the world. And anytime you add a new category to a list of these things, something else is going to give. This category gave the most from what I could tell from all the other priorities. So again, I don't think it's that it's not still important. It's still up there at, almost a quarter of people. But it might mean that we've had to back off a little bit about how we're thinking about engaging people in our entire KM program. And we're focused on engaging them in some of these new AI and smart technology capabilities. The other priorities up there are all, again, very common. We're trying to mature our program. That's still very high. If you can see the maturity of the programs from 2 years ago, or I guess it'd be 3 years ago now, it went from 10% up to 25 last year, and it stayed up there at 22 this year, which means people are very focused on making sure that their KM programs overall and the efforts are maturing more effectively. So good to see that. Again, that means KM is keeping that seat at the table, and we're continuing to value what the KM teams are doing. We still believe that, and these are, Cindy, I think these are your words or Carla's words, I can't remember, but even with this new AI capability, we still think there's going to be a bunch of random acts of AI until people really figure it out, I don't know if you want to say anything more about that, but I love
Well,
that.
Lynda, it's just I see it across the board, guys. I'd be interested with our audience, all the way from people who are still not really allowed to use any type of generative AI capabilities or tools in the workplace. So they're doing it outside, I assure you, and testing it and playing with it.
Yeah.
To those who are embracing it but want real control, I understand there's regulatory, legal, data privacy, all the things that we've talked about. Knowledge creation is a really big buzz thing. When you're in the business as APQC with original research and thoughts, how do you really think about, taking advantage of some of the capabilities? And so I think it's got to be part of a strategy. At this point, Lynda, I don't know. I still think knowledge management needs a huge seat at that table to talk about AI strategy, because we know so much about expertise. For example, we're talking about knowledge transfer and that whole expertise thing. How do you use AI to enable that process of transfer? All the way from, and I'll take the real simple, how do you perhaps automate some of the more routine, some people might call them mundane tasks, to get those done with AI, where then that interplay between an expert and an expert gets to really spend time learning and talking about that deep-seated knowledge, or working together on some deep problem or wicked problem that you have. Our friend Jean-Claude Monet, I want to give him a shout out. He used to be with Microsoft doing some really cool things. He's spending a lot of time thinking about that. And he's the one who I talked about prompt engineering with. And I think Carla even mentioned she wanted to know if anybody was taking some classes on it, because it's what we know as the experts. It's the experts' time, Lynda, to be able to train the AI to do better and better things, and not just kind of slosh around with it and take a chance. So I just think there's a lot of opportunities that we need to be experimenting with in real controlled spaces so we can see it, because it's going to have a huge impact on us whether we want it or not.
Very well said. And the prompt engineering, when we say Carla, for those of you that don't know, Dr. Carla Odell, who's the chairman of board for APQC and a very well-known knowledge management expert, she walked through this information with us and gave us a few of her insights, which is great. Yeah. She took a prompt engineering course because she was interested in it. I think it was Stanford's course that she said she took. But this prompt engineering piece is making me think about, when we talk about skill sets for KM, is that going to be a new category we need to add to our KM skill sets going forward, right? Is that prompt engineering? Is that something we're going to be expected to do or teach, or at the minimum understand, right? In helping people how to use and craft queries that are more effective in those new generative AI models. So not going deep into it today, but it is something that we're going to have to go deep into. And if you remember at the beginning of the session, I told you we're currently have a live survey right now going on around emerging technologies. So more to come when we get those results back in that research. We will be digging deeper into some of those areas, which I think it's going to be fascinating to see what everyone in the KM sphere is going to say. And there are so many chats going on. I can't even keep up. I'm watching them.
It's like with them, Lynda, and I want to give somebody credit, but I can't find who they are. So when I mentioned prompt engineers, somebody came back to me. I'm sorry, I'm not remembering who it did, but they said, "Oh, prompt engineers are knowledge engineers." I went, "Oh, I love you." Ooh, so what a great way to think about that. Yes. I'll find out who you are and I'll give you some credit.
Yes. It might have been Victor, because he was talking about prompts as knowledge, but
it's somebody in there. Thank you.
One thing I wanted to mention too was somebody had put something back. I'm not sure I can find it either, but they said, is knowledge hoarding still a thing? And you know, it is still on our priorities list, but it didn't make the top, right? So it's still a thing. And there's still some people who are dealing with that kind of behavior. I think that's becoming less and less commonplace in today's world, right? The way we share and everything. So I think that's a good thing. I remember when I started in KM over 20 years ago, knowledge hoarding was a big problem and a big deal. And it was something that we were challenged with all the time, because people, you know, that's when that whole knowledge is power thing was really a big deal. And what we realize is that knowledge is really powerful when it's shared. Right? That's why we have KM. So a great question, and it's definitely in there. And if you look in our research, you'll see we go all the way to the bottom of all the priorities, and you can see where some of those might fall a little bit lower in the list. Okay, moving on. We're going to talk about the top 5 technologies important to KM right now. Shocking, I know that there's quite a bit about AI in here. And this is a place where we did add a new category, because we're really trying to distinguish between traditional AI, which has been around, literally can be traced back to the mid-50s, I believe, and the new generative AI capabilities, because they are not one and the same. And we want to make sure people are understanding these things. And when they're focusing on AI, is it using some of those traditional methods that some people have been doing for a while, and they've got them in place and they're working well and they're expanding and they're evolving? And how do we then deal with these new generative AI capabilities, which is really about creating new artifacts, new content, whereas the traditional is really more about recommending, surfacing, classifying content that's already there. So we felt like we needed to distinguish, and I believe it was a good choice, because look at how much we have in both categories. And we're trying to help people understand the difference between the two. And I think it's important to keep it segregated. The interesting thing is team collaboration is still ranked number 2 on the technologies. You can see it dropped significantly from last year, But again, when we add a new category, it tends to take away from other categories. Totally understandable. But with that said, the team collaboration tools, the virtual collaboration and all of that is still extremely important for KM teams to support. They own them in a lot of cases. They're the ones structuring the content management, right, within these environments that then support these AI-driven tools and AI-driven search. So really important to remember all of these things still need to work together. Okay, and I'm gonna, we're gonna talk about content management a little bit, but I think it is important. Cindy had brought it up before that talking about AI has and the constant disruption and disorganization of the information and the data that we have in our organizations is forcing us to really surface that content management conversation again. Yeah. And it can be frustrating for those KM people who have been talking about and trying to do content management for years, decades probably. But now I think with the new onset of some of these emerging technologies, it's really bringing to light the importance of good, solid content management. Your data cannot be unstructured to leverage some of these new capabilities. Now, some of these new capabilities can help you structure it more effectively as well, but you still need the good content management component, which is why we're going to focus on that in a webinar in a couple of months as well. So
that was a great lead in, Lynda. Yeah, you know that one of my goals a couple of years ago was to get smarter about content management. And I'll just give you a personal story of what really flipped it for me, because I really was an arm's distance saying, oh, it's technology. I'm just a user. I want the experience. But flipped it over, and APQC actually elevated content management as a capability and an approach to a process-based approach. That's one of our categories.
Yeah.
When you start thinking about it as a process that gets enabled by technology, and this is so simple for some of you, I realize that, but when you start doing that, you'd be surprised how you start getting your users, your business people, engaged in that conversation. Because after all, job is a series of tasks. It's what we execute. We want the technologies there to help make it better, to automate. And when you start getting them involved, they begin to see, I think, the opportunity for upskilling, for using the content management flow, the content flow, and how they participate in that and get to the explicit knowledge that they need. That's become such a critical part of their role, because it's a highly collaborative activity if you're not hiring 200 content managers to help do all that. So technology enables it, but also being able to look at it as a process that people are responsible for really does take you to a different conversation level. And then the technology is really cool because it can do a lot of things to help.
And not only, and that's a great statement. And not only is it a process, Cindy, it's a process like any other that requires ongoing governance and requires partnership with the business, because the KM teams can't do it by themselves. Like you said, you're not hiring 200 content owners. You're leveraging the subject matter experts and those owners within the business who know and understand that content to do better content management. So just a big conversation. I'm really excited that we're going to focus a little bit more on this this year as well. So it'll be exciting. Okay. Okay. Trying to look at some of the chats too and make sure we're not missing. I know there's a lot in there. We're
all good.
Missing, but
I know.
Just so you know, we do capture all of the comments, not with your names, but we do like to capture all the comments in our summary report out so that we don't lose those. And if you're trying to pay attention to the webinar, you can go back and read this later and see all those great comments that people put in, and you don't have to think about trying to take the notes the whole time that we're chatting today. So probably should have told you that up front. Anyway, okay, so this is a piece of data right here that I decided to bring in. It's not from our priorities survey, but it's from a quick poll that we did with some members, almost 300 members last October. And we were trying to get a handle on what is it we need to even be talking about as it relates to technology, and how KM how technology enables KM. So we did a quick poll just to get some insights from our members before we decided to dig deeper into our current technology study that's going on right now. And one of the questions we asked was, we wanted to know, with all of this onset of AI, is there still digital transformations and digital strategies really happening in the organization? Or has everybody kind of slowed down and just said, let's do all things AI? What does that look like? And from a KM perspective, how involved are you then in that digital strategy overall? And I think this is an important piece of information for us to know as we think about priorities going forward. So as you can see from this, we have 65% that are at least moderately involved with their company's digital strategy, and 34% that are very or extremely involved. So that's a third of KM teams that are very and extremely involved in digital strategies, which is great. Now, in some cases, it might be because the KM team is located in IT, but that's not always the case, right? Sometimes it's just such a good partnership, or you're all maybe under some central function or what have you. But the point is that 65% of KM teams are involved. Now, we still have some struggling to get a seat at that table, right, for that digital conversation, and we'll continue to focus on those things. But I just thought this was an interesting piece, and it really shows why the AI component is coming in so high, and some of those other technology components are coming in so high on our priorities right now, is because we are heavily involved in the digital strategy, right? So I think it's a really good thing. And you know, Cindy and I were talking about this like a month ago, I think, and said kind of our hypothesis is that mature KM organizations are typically the ones that are probably more involved in their digital strategy. They've got the partnerships in place. They've been doing it for a while. They're considered to have a seat at the table in this conversation. So that's something we're going to dig into and try to find that correlation in our current study right now. So stay tuned for that. And we're going to see if there is a correlation between those higher levels of mature organizations and their partnerships with digital. So I think that'll be interesting.
So much.
Okay. One more note I wanted to make. I was listening to a podcast a couple of weeks ago, and a man named Dr. Rashad Najjar, very interesting podcast on AI, but he commented on this misperception that AI is really part of digital transformation. And he says it's actually more of a cultural transformation than it is anything else. So I thought that was really interesting. Now, we all know, I think all of us have talked about the fact that there's a huge impact to the culture with AI, but to even consider it as part of your culture transformation in your organization, in lieu of it being just a digital strategy or a digital transformation, I think it just makes us think a little bit differently about how we might approach as we go forward with trying to help people transition. Because when you have a cultural transformation, you need to think about the people and how they feel and how it impacts them, what skills they need, and so on. So I thought that was fascinating. Okay, time for a poll.
Yeah.
Let's do a poll.
Yeah, we just had to know this, right, Lynda?
Mm-hmm.
This is important. Look at all those responses you can have.
Well, and this one's fascinating, Cindy, because not everybody is actually involved. And so I'm curious how this is going to turn out compared to what our previous research just showed us. Let's see how closely we are aligned to that.
Yeah. Lynda, I actually even found this hard to answer. Even, you know, APQC, we support a global membership, and we have a lot of things going on with our own digital transformation and footprint things that we're doing.
Yes, we do.
And so, yeah, it's a tough one because parts of the organization may be in different phases. So answer for where you best can see everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Maybe we can see the answers now, Brittnee.
Oh man, look at that, guys. A lot of you are fully there. We need 9 of you to come forward.
Yeah, I'm going to talk to those people.
Yeah.
74 are in progress.
That's where I would have put myself. We would have put ourselves, I think, in that bucket.
I agree.
Resources. Yeah. Boy, guys, so that one, Lynda, not implementing due to lack of understanding. Again, I think going back to that KMC at the table, that's why we're trying to keep up with it and help you guys stay a couple of steps ahead. Certainly not with the expertise that AI practitioners have, but at least understanding knowledge management's role in all of this and how they're going to use it.
Absolutely. And somebody put in the chat that this is a very broad question. It's hard to answer depending on where you are. And I get that. So this is your best, this gives us some insight to let us know that most people are in progress with this and they've got pilot implementations going on in some respect across the organization.
Yeah, but Lynda, let me point out something, guys. It gets back to what Lynda said. Yes, I love that whole random X because I think random X falls into so many spaces of KM, of improvement. So you've got to get your arms around this because I bet there are a lot of acts going on in the name of artificial intelligence and using it.
Absolutely.
And just knowing what all's going on, you could learn from each other.
Absolutely. Totally agree.
AJ. Somebody feels like it should be not implementing due to C, D, and E.
Yep. We didn't give you multiple choices. Sorry about that. Made you pick one. Made you pick one. So thank you. Thank you for participating. Okay, so we're going to go on and we're going to talk a little bit about those business priorities. Again, at the heart of knowledge management capabilities is we need to put those things in place that support what our business is trying to accomplish, right? What are those most important and relevant business priorities? And let's stay connected to those. So here's a look at what our respondents are telling us. We did add a new category this year. We've always had productivity. Productivity has always been one of those key focus areas for knowledge management from the beginning, right? Because we're helping people access information faster, get to experts faster, share knowledge faster, get to competency faster, all of those things. But the concept of operational efficiency and process improvement and how KM can help support that as well. To me, productivity is an outcome of having those things in place, right? So we added this as a new category and it came in as number 1, which means we probably needed it maybe sooner. But I think this is an important area because, and I think some of this might be triggered by some of the AI things that are going on. But there are so many other components of knowledge management that contribute to this concept of process improvement and operational efficiency. I always said when doing KM in an organization, my first step was always, what process am I even supporting? What process is supporting the work that these people are doing that we're going to impact with some of these KM capabilities? So to me, the process component and the knowledge component almost always they have to go hand in hand. You have to understand how people are working in order to help them work more effectively. The digital transformation piece, ironically, dropped a little bit on this from a business priority perspective. And I don't know if that was because we're looking at operational efficiencies more, or we're just not as focused on that overall digital and we're really just thinking about AI right now or what, but it did drop a little bit as well. And productivity took the biggest hit, obviously, because I think productivity and efficiency are somewhat related. So curious how you feel about that. If you have an opinion about how we worded these and how we did this, and if it makes sense or doesn't, throw that in the chat too. We always like to hear feedback on that. I think putting these in terms of the way people think about process improvement and operational efficiency is important. It helps us with continuing that message around partnering with our process improvement experts and that discipline within our organization as well.
Yeah, Lynda, I think, guys, I have another I'm sorry, I've got more observations than great responses to it. I have some theories. So I'm glad to see continuous learning up there. Lynda, I think we're going to have to rethink learning as an activity, as a department, as an outcome, as an ongoing thing because of the AI. I think that we still have very traditional ways that we promote learning, and that's okay. I think those are needed, but I do think that AI is going to give us some really cool ways to think about knowing how to learn. Absolutely. And I'm real into that because I think, again, I think it's about the future of expertise and how we build that to stay ahead of the game.
I agree with you. And like the learning component has always been a big part of KM strategies. A lot of KM strategies are focused around building a learning organization, right? That's really at the heart of a lot of what we do too with our connecting people to expertise and connecting people to one another. And, ensuring the legacy of the knowledge that we have in our most critical experts in the organization, all of that. So I love that. And
Yes.
Christina asked a question in the
Good question. I was going to respond to her, so I had to
yeah.
answer it for her. Yes.
No, well, what I was going to say was that I'm not sure we have a one pager, Christina, but most of our research right now is focused from a productivity perspective. And so I think we need to rethink how we're talking about this from really that operational efficiencies, as well as we have a lot on productivity. If you look at the key benchmarks, if you can find some of those things, and happy to share with you. I can't remember if we have an infographic or a one pager or not, Christina, but I know we have research on that.
Yeah, and Christina, I'll do just because I think this is valuable for everyone. I think that there is a relationship, and I think that there's a technique APQC uses called value pathing, and I think that's the way to show the correlation and how they're related. And so we'll make sure, Lynda, we'll include that in some of the read ahead or the things we send out, just the article on value paths.
Okay. Yep, I agree. That's a good one. I don't think I have that in the resources at the end, but we can certainly add that one. That's a good question.
I'm sorry, on the fly.
No, leave it to Christina to ask a good question that actually stumps me just a little bit. That's what she's so smart. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Oh, no, you go ahead. Okay. I'm going to move on and talk about, this is something we ask every year too, about what's the most important or what is most important for the KM user experience moving forward. So when you think about what user experience you're providing with your knowledge management program approaches, capabilities, is it about simplification? Is it about making sure it's in the flow? Is it about personalizing or providing that anticipatory knowledge, serving it up to people before they even know it, right? Or deep. We've always had the deep too, incorporating that whole concept of deep tacit knowledge and expertise, as well as the content and information that we're already serving up. We did add a category. This is another place where we added something this year. And this is another question for you all. Did it help or did it confuse more? Cindy and I had a dialogue around this as well. I like the automated component because I feel like it is a little bit different in how we think about our user experience, and this word is being thrown around a lot more, and people are asking for things that are more automated to make their lives easier. Again, reduce the amount of time it takes them to do the same tasks and make more time for innovative thinking and actually doing those forward thinking things that we never seem to have time for. So we put automated in here and it actually popped in with 20%. So obviously others might have felt that this is a necessary category, but it doesn't take away from the fact that the in the flow component is always extremely important to what anything that we do needs to be about putting it in the flow of people's work, right? Every day. An automated task is great as long as it's in the flow of their work processes and they don't have to step aside to do it, different and separately from how they work. That's not productive at all. So I just want to make that point that the in the flow still obviously has the greatest percentage from a user experience perspective, but the others are extremely important. And I think it's probably dependent on where you are right now in your journey with KM, how you're thinking about this.
Yeah. Lynda, you know what I think on this too? I'm glad we ask this every year. And I'm really glad you had the automated, because I think people, again, we've talked about routine versus non-routine tasks for years. Thank you, Nancy Dixon, who got us into that thinking. Yeah. I'm giving her credit. She's the first one I heard talk about. Yeah. And I just think that we've got to get going back to this cultural and people aspect. So they want it easy, right? And we know we can do that. They want it automated, but I think you have to prepare your people for then what's next. So what will you do if it's easy to get to that information? If you automate some things, how does that what do you need to do to upskill yourself and to deal with the more complex work that you're going to do because of what you know? And so I just think we've got to think about that on when we talk about culture, engagement and stuff. People have to understand they still have a play in this. Otherwise, the machines are going to take us over. Yeah. Isn't that all of what we're thinking?
Yes, the Terminator is here. That somebody put in the chat too. that they think the in the flow and the automated go together. And I think Cindy and I had that conversation as well, right? So again, it's just kind of interesting to see where people's heads are in this process, right? As we go forward with user experience. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to keep moving and we're going to jump into the future of KM. And I won't spend too much time on this slide because it's not a whole lot different than what we talked about when we said what's important to us right now. But this is the question that says, what's going to be important in the next 3 years? Basically the same responses in a little bit different order in some cases. The generative AI moved up a little bit for those that 3-year outlook. And the team collaboration tools moved to the right a little bit and lessened. Again, not that they're not important, it's just what's going to be top of mind and where are we going to be focused. And there might be some places where the technology is still important, but we might be in a little bit more of a steady state, constant upkeep, evolution, right, with your cloud-based collaboration tools and so on. Okay, now we're going to do another poll really quick. And this one is, whoops, sorry about that. This one is, you might not be able to answer this question, but somebody brought this up in our webinar we did in December when we talked a little bit about technology back then. And they said they had to put some things in place around the tangible benefits of AI, and they weren't seeing them based on what their company thought. So I said, let's ask that question. So for those of you that actually have some AI capabilities in place, even if those are those traditional things you might have had in place for a few years, or maybe some of the newer generative AI capabilities, are you seeing, or what are the tangible benefits that you're actually seeing within your organization today? We'd really like to know that.
Yeah, Lynda, you're going to get comments on this too. There's a lot of it, right? We're asking you to pick one. And this may lead us to that whole, we've got a lot of things going on and they're impacting different things. So what is the organization really going to pay attention to, you know? One of the things our friend Jean-Claude Monet said as well, he said, Cindy, I think that, and someone in the chat commented on this too, we've just never seen anything like this, where so many things are coming together at one time. The generative AI, the speed at which, the pace of information, how we're processing it, where we are just in our own journey of knowledge management, it's huge.
It is.
So we're at a really great time.
It is. And
well, you guys come to the conference.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if we shouldn't have given people the opportunity to choose more than one answer on this one now that I look at this. Let's go ahead and show this poll and see what we've got. We're getting a few people telling us they don't have it implemented, which I totally understand, but wow, it looks like a few. So those operational efficiencies and the search enhancements are really those kind of core areas, which makes sense. Enhanced content management capabilities. Ooh, I want to talk to those people too. That's amazing. Access to expertise, upskilling. Oh, I love that there's something in every category. This is exciting.
Yeah. Somebody asked earlier in the chat about, they were surprised in one of your previous data slides where innovation was so low in your business priorities. Again, that may have been just from our, you know, our participants in that. But I think you've got some people here, 14%, looking at the creation of new content. I think we've got some opportunities there, not only to speed the pipeline, but to add some quality insights into it, whether that's through giving an expert new ideas that they can build on, or just generating new ideas using AI. But boy, be careful. You got to train it just right.
You
talk about creating new content.
It's so fascinating. I just love all the comments too. People are talking about things that correlate to one another. And somebody said it's really hard to answer because depending on how you might define some of these things as well. Totally agree with that. When we do our surveys, our deep surveys that we send out to you, we try to always have definitions of things as well so that you know how you're answering the questions. Polls, these are a little bit more quick polls. So thank
you all who continue to try to make my search better. I need to talk to you. We're going to get it eventually.
Okay, so we're just about to the end, and I know that we're at the top of the hour. I hope that most of you can hang out with us for these last few minutes because we're going to hit the skill sets and some of the takeaways. So everything we talked about leading up to now leads to what skill sets do we need then to develop as a KM discipline to make sure that we can keep up with all those priorities and we can go do those things that we need to do for our organizations. Change management and design thinking have been number 1 and 2 for the last, at the minimum, 3 years. I know change is at least 4 years. And they just kind of stay there. Now, change did drop a little bit this year, but it's still number 1. Design thinking is still up there. Critical thinking and problem solving jumped up a little bit. And look at partnership and collaboration. Wow. I mean, it went from 11 and 12% 2 years consecutively up to 30%. Now, we believe some of that's probably due to some of the latest things happening from the AI perspective, right? Really looking at that partnership and that collaboration capability. But what else could it be? Is it all just because of technology, or is there other things going on out there in the KM world where the partnership and collaboration piece is really sticking now, and KM teams are really striving to get out there and partner with their business? I can tell you from some of my member conversations that I have, I'm hearing more and more about how KM teams are actually being more focused or centered in like a center of excellence or a common function in the organization. And they're being asked to really drive KM across all of the functions by identifying KM champions and content owners and such within the business, and really working at it as a more of a partnership. Instead of having a huge KM team, we have a small central team, but we work through the people in the business to make sure that KM is happening. And I feel like that in and of itself can drive some of that need to partner and collaborate as well. So, okay. And then critical thinking and problem solving. I just want to make one note that we added the term critical thinking to the problem solving category this year. We really felt those two go hand in hand when you think about continuous improvement and quality and how they think about critical thinking and problem solving. They really do go hand in hand. And I've been hearing the concept of critical thinking a lot more lately and talking to KM teams as well, that we dig in and we try to solve a problem, and we're not really doing it in a way that is the most effective, right? We're taking our KM solutions, we're going in, but we're not really understanding. So it's really about that appreciative inquiry and understanding what's really happening in there before we begin to try to solve a problem. Sometimes it might need a nail, sometimes it might not, right? If they always say everything looks, what is that saying, where if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? And that's not the case. You have to look at each situation differently and be able to critically think through it. So
Lynda, I think one of our participants said it so well. So challenging is there is lots of connective tissue between the skills.
yes,
that.
Yes. And
someone said earlier, is knowledge hoarding a medical condition? And I said, well, just like knowledge sharing is not a religious experience. No, I don't think so. But it can make us feel unhealthy, right, as an organization.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love the connective tissue. Keep that in mind, George. That's a great statement, because we're gonna wrap up talking a little bit about what that means for KM. So we're going to do another poll, just because we're thinking about this concept of change management, and we're going to be focusing on this again in a webinar next month with one of our members, as well as a roundtable for our members as well, where we can have a good discussion. But which area of change management could your organization really improve upon the most? And we're really looking at change holistically. These are the things that it takes to help people move from a current to a future state. So it's leadership, communications, training, engagement, and resistance, having a change framework in place. And I know you probably can say maybe all of these things, but what's maybe one thing that you could do to begin improving that journey of change a little bit more?
That's right, because you have to start somewhere.
Got to start somewhere.
Right. And Lynda, I'm going to give you a plug, just so if you all end up at the conference, Lynda's going to be teaching our newest course on managing change. So it's for all audiences. So I hope you can come join us.
It's going to be fun. And hopefully insightful and fun and collaborative and all of those things. So, okay, here's our results. Wow, we've got a mixed bag a little bit, but having a change framework in place is quite important. Sometimes trying to approach it in a way that is not consistent across the organization can be really challenging. So that's really great. And our change research that we did last year actually shows that the majority of organizations are working towards their own framework. right? They're pulling in from all of those great sources, ProSci and William Bridges and McKinsey and all those different models that Cotter that might be out there, but they're making it their own so that it fits their culture and they're leveraging those capabilities that are most effective. So that's when I see that, I think about that. It's hard to do that, but when you have something like that in place, everybody's speaking the same language.
I love it.
Skills and resources, leadership buy-in, communications training. Yeah, the employee engagement resistance is always, that one's tough because you're going to get those people who just don't want to change.
Lynda, we've got a great chat going on. I got to tell this. Bob said we need to rank these instead of choosing one. Bob, I love that. So
That's a great idea.
Take
Yes.
that back to your organization, these, and rank them and look at that. That could really help you prioritize.
I'm gonna make a note. Maybe we'll do the same. Maybe we'll do the same poll in our next change management webinar, and we can rank them that time and see what people say. That's a great suggestion. Thank you. Okay, we're going to keep moving. And there's a lot of words on this slide, and I'm not going to go over all of them necessarily, but I really wanted you to have them because in our research this year, we asked an open-ended question and we let people tell us in their own words what they think and what they predict for knowledge management. So these themes to me represent how a lot of our members are feeling. And then there's really a strong emphasis in these themes on technology, organization, structure, and just the changing landscape of work. So I tried to put some highlights in here for you to just see, because again, I don't want to read to you this slide, but really it's about KM being adaptive and being able to evolve, right? Like we said before, be prepared, always have that value proposition in your pocket and be ready for that forward movement. And I love number 2, the perception shift. Let's get KM out of that cost center bucket and really looked at as a differentiator and a competitive advantage for your organization. Now, number 3 speaks to what that person, I can't remember who said it, but about the connected tissue, right? Of KM. This multidisciplinary nature of KM is so value added. And I've been talking about this for years, along with Kim Glover from Techneep, right? Adjacent disciplines to KM are really what helps you to become the most effective. You're partnering with learning, you're bringing in IT, you're bringing in communications, continuous improvement, change management, I'll even say quality, right? And business acumen. All of those things contribute to the effectiveness of KM. So you really need to think about it as a multidisciplinary thing that really you're there to help bring that together. So flexibility, foundational, obviously in this era of AI, that was a big part of that's why there's a little bit more listed here, because there was a lot around this era of AI, but really KM seen as a foundational component, which I think is fantastic. And then also, now last but not least, just not forget that KM goes beyond technology, and it requires a seat at the table, and it still requires us to focus on working and partnering with our leadership on business priorities and so on. Okay. Now, these are the takeaways. Again, a few more words, but these were some of the things we think about from takeaway perspective. Love to hear your takeaways for 2024 and beyond, based on what you heard today, or based on just what you're talking about within your own organizations. But really, this is about, again, KM being prime time, focusing on AI as urgent, but how do you do that in a way that's effective? And I love this quote from McKinsey, and I actually put a link to this article because I thought it was pretty fascinating in here. Innovators dominate headlines, but scalers dominate markets. And I thought that was really good, because we all want to be innovative, and I do, we all do, right? That's great. But when it comes to being able to take something like AI that's coming at us so fast and it's so new and everybody's trying to do it, if you can figure out how to take it and build those use cases that are most valuable for your organization and then scale it effectively to across your company, you can dominate more effectively, right, in your market, in your industry going forward. So take a look at that if you have a chance. Focus on change management. Focus on the fact that KM really does impact business results. Again, it's about that value proposition for KM and staying at the ready for that. I put a quote on here from our own, we love Tom Davenport, and he partnered with Nitin Mittal on a book called Stop Tinkering with AI. And I liked this quote because it says, to get substantial value from AI, your organization must fundamentally rethink the way that humans and machines interact in work environments. And I think that's very true. And we're having to do that right now. So it's just something good to remember. And with that, we are actually at the end. And I just want to put a couple of reminders out here. We always provide you with a list of resources relevant to what we talked about today. So take a look at those. Please take a chance to fill out the survey if you get it on the for the webinar. We love the feedback. We love the new ideas you're giving us in the chat, and just the real honest feedback. It helps us to make these conversations that much better. And with that, we do have still a couple of minutes left for those of you that are still on. We'd love to maybe address some more chat or any questions that we might have in the Q&A.
Yeah. Lynda, we had an interesting question. I've been saving it because I thought this will be we can do this quickly because it's more complicated. But someone said, how can we transfer knowledge from one CEO to a new one? And boy, you think that happens, right? Yeah. So, I think all of our principles really do help. I think the situation that you find yourself in, so is it a friendly retirement? Is it a more volatile one? Will really guide you as to what you can capture. And I guess the smart thing to do, if you can get that seed up high enough, is to just constantly have some type of capture elicitation mechanism in place for that leader and the direct reports, the team, to get some of that knowledge out. So you've got, something before that leader leaves.
Yeah. I feel like that is a good question, but I feel like this, and maybe you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but in most organizations, the succession plan is fairly robust for those C-suite individuals, and sometimes doesn't seem to be as big of an issue sometimes for those levels because there's already somebody that's been identified that might already be mentoring with them, or they're even shadowing them in those roles. But if that's not the case, everything Cindy said needs to happen anyway, right? Because you can't just, it's hard to step into a role when someone's gone the next day and you don't have a chance to actually spend time with them. But from what I've seen in a lot of organizations for roles at the C-suite level, that shadowing or knowing that you're going to be that next person sometimes can be really helpful as well, because then you have an opportunity to spend time. I mean, the best knowledge transfer is one-to-one, right? Tell me about it. Tell me how you did this. How did you experience this? It's such a rare thing that we get to do. It's such a rare thing. So
Lynda, there was another interesting thing, and you always have a great opinion of this. Chris said the art of storytelling has largely been lost in our current culture because, especially post-COVID, just the disconnection, people remote and everything. And the comment was, we just need to recapture. You have any thoughts on that? Just the art of storytelling and how it impacts change?
That's a great question.
I know, in 1 minute or less, Lynda.
Yeah, and I love that question, and I love that you brought that up because I personally feel the art of storytelling lost by not being in an office. I too am a remote worker, and I think a lot of those stories happen on an ad hoc basis. Now, we have a lot of stories that we plan. There's a lot of places that have storytelling templates, and we try to capture those anecdotal stories that we can share from a one-to-many situation. But I think the art of the storytelling from one-to-one is also missing because of the way we're working today as well. And I think we need to think about storytelling as differently. It's not one way to do it. It's multiple ways to do it. And we have lost it. I agree with you. There's so much chat going on in the organization where we're just getting the one quick answer to our question, but we never got to say, how are you doing? How was your day? Tell me what's happening in your space right now, and really start to dig in and inquire and be inquisitive about what's happening in people's worlds. That's where new ideas and innovations truly open up. And I think it starts with the art of being able to tell a story and want to listen to someone else's story as well. So I agree with you. I think we've lost it a little bit, and I think we need to start focusing on it. It didn't fall very high into our priorities this year. It's still up there, so we still need to focus on it, but we need to talk a little bit more about what that looks like and how it feels probably in I'm going to say a more virtual environment, because I love the anecdotal stories that people tell. That's how I learn best. I listen and learn from stories. So I don't know that I really answered the question. I kind of gave you my insights into it, but love it. It's going to make me think more about wanting to focus a little bit on storytelling. It's still up there from a priority perspective. It's just not on the top of the list. So we usually have somebody at the conference talk about storytelling as well. So hopefully we do again this year. Oh, Dan, love that. Storytelling and critical thinking go hand in hand. Of course, very profound statement. I love that, Dan. Thank you.
It gives you that correlation between causal effects and impact. Yeah,
it does. It does. Okay, I think we are at time, and thank you for those who stuck around for the entire time. I know we lost a few people, but it was fun to have a little bit of extra time to really delve into some of our insights and have some conversation with you. So we appreciate everyone being here. Again, please take a look at the resources that you will be sent following this webinar. And please provide us your feedback if you can. And we look forward to seeing you in a future session or hopefully at the conference as well. It was great to see everyone.
Thanks, Lynda.
Bye.
Bye-bye.